Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. I'm going to share a little bit with all of you about Rabbi Hecht and tell you a little bit about the person that he was. Rabbi Jacob J. Hecht of blessed memory was one of the Rebbe's greatest aides and allies and helpers here in America. The first thing you have to know about Rabbi Hecht was he did not know the word impossible. In fact, when I wrote into ChatGPT, can you tell me one line about Rabbi Jacob J. Hecht? They wrote back to me, Rabbi Hecht did not know the word impossible. If Rabbi Hecht believed something had to be done, whether it was the right thing to do to help another Jew, Rabbi Hecht, he didn't ask questions, do we have the funding? He didn't ask questions, do we have the staffing? Is it possible? Is it realistic? He simply asked one question. Does the Rebbe want us to do this? And if the answer was yes, Rabbi Hecht would go ahead and do it. Impossible was absolutely not in his vocabulary at all. And I can say that with this attitude, he was capable of building countless institutions, and many of them, such as the one we are in today, Yeshivas Hadar Torah, carries his name. The next thing you should know about Rabbi Hecht is Rabbi Hecht could talk to absolutely anybody. Rabbi Hecht had what you would call a chush. He had a talent in speaking, and he really liked to speak to people. And both Rabbi Hecht and the Rebbe really utilized this talent to use him as an orator to speak on behalf of Chabad Lubavitch around the world. I think the greatest testimony to who Rabbi Hecht was and what Rabbi Hecht's abilities were was the fact that the Rebbe trusted him so much. The confidence that the Rebbe put into Rabbi Hecht was unbelievable. And we see that both publicly as well as privately, as well as through letters. Whenever there's countless stories where something was wrong, the Rebbe called Rabbi Hecht and said, I know you're going to take care of it. And that was the situation. The next thing about Rabbi Hecht was absolutely fearless. There was no opponent too scary or too big for Rabbi Hecht. Rabbi Hecht was always there. If he thought something was right, if he thought there was something that had to be done, he really didn't care about the controversy or about whichever component or opponent he was going up against. In the 1960s and 1970s, there was an epidemic across America where young Jews were leaving Judaism. And they were joining cults and joining missionary groups, etc., or sometimes other religions. And Rabbi Hecht started anti-Shmad. And he didn't care who he's up against. Through the work of anti-Shmad, they started cult busting. To my father today, Rabbi Shia Hecht, is a world-renowned Jewish expert in the field of cult busting because his father taught him and brought him in the 70s to start working on this. I want to share a story which I think would show a little bit about how Rabbi Hecht was so fearless. I once interviewed a gentleman by the name of David Weiss. I believe David Weiss, when I interviewed him, he lived in a house in Brooklyn Heights. But at some point, he lived in Manhattan. And I went to go interview him, and he started to tell me a little bit about his story. So, as most of you know, Rabbi Hecht was on the radio for a bunch of decades. He had the Shema Yisrael radio program. It was the longest-running Jewish broadcast radio program in America at a time where radio was the only platform. So today you have TikTok and Instagram and all these other platforms where people can share things. But in those days, radio was the platform. Everybody listened to the radio. So Rabbi Hecht had his radio program. And this Mr. Weiss, his wife actually used to listen to Rabbi Hecht's radio program. Mr. Weiss worked as a copywriter at a big PR firm in New York City. One day Rabbi Hecht calls the PR firm, and he gets a hold of Mr. Weiss, and he tells Mr. Weiss, I want to send out a press release, and I heard you're the #1 copywriter in New York City, and I want you to help me write up the article, and I want you to help me send out the article and get it printed. And he said, I met with him and I helped him write up the article and we sent it out. And he said, from then I became Rabbi Hecht's unofficial publicist. And basically at a certain point he was writing an article for Rabbi Hecht every single week. He said Rabbi Hecht would have a topic, he wanted to write an article. He said, first of all, one thing you should know about Rabbi Hecht, my grandfather anything that he did, he sent out a press release. He would send out 12 press releases a day, which, by the way, was the ideology of the Rebbe. The Rebbe said if you're doing anything to bolster Judaism, you have to send it out to the press and let people actually know about it and see it. So Rabbi Hecht had his new publicist, and he really worked along with him for a very, very long time. Mr. Weiss was telling me, he said, first I told him, listen, Rabbi, I'm not going to charge you. He said, of course I'm going to pay you. So he said, by the time he got me the check, I think the check bounced, and I said, okay, never again. I'm not going to take any money from you, Rabbi. But he said every single week, the rabbi would call me up and say, I read this in this article, or I heard this in this point, and I want to make sure that we're going out, and we have to write up an article, and this is my thoughts on the subject. I want you to go and go back and forth. And he would write up the article, and he would send it out. He says, one day he calls me up. He says, David, do you know I read that there's a whole new epidemic of prostitution in Times Square, and I want you to write an article, and we have to reach out to our community leaders and our politicians, and I heard they have mafia money behind them. We have to take down the mafia because the mafia are pumping prostitution against our children. Let's go out there. Let's do whatever has to be done. Rabbi Hecht went. They wrote the article. They sent it out. Apparently, they got a lot of press from that article. And he said, as Mr. Weiss tells me the story, which I recorded actually, he says, you should know that every week there was a new topic, and every topic was more controversial than the last topic. But Rabbi Hecht always found a good topic to speak about, and he wasn't afraid about whoever the opponent was. The next thing you should know about Rabbi Hecht is Rabbi Hecht remembered everybody. When he walked down the street, if he met someone once, it could be years later, he remembered everything about them. He would see them. How's your mother? How's your child? How's your occupation? He knew everything about people. And it wasn't because he had an unbelievable memory. It's possible he did have an unbelievable memory. I don't know. But I think the reason was because to Rabbi Hecht, the most important thing was Ahavas Yisrael. When he met another Jew and he said to them, how is your mother? He wasn't being polite. He really cared. How is your mother doing? That was really important to him. And so therefore, when he met a person, he took interest in that person and he spoke to that person and he learned about that person's life and that person's family. And when he met them years later, he remembered it because it really was important to him because he really cared about that person. There was a certain rabbi in New York. I'm not going to say his name. There's a certain rabbi in New York who gets a phone call at 11 o'clock at night. Now, today, it's very normal to send a WhatsApp at 2 o'clock in the morning. But in those days, if you call someone at 11 o'clock at night, it means you're schlepping them out of bed, and it means there's a real emergency. And the rabbi picks up the phone, and the guy says, I'm so-and-so, and I'm in a bad situation, and I need some help. And he starts to tell him the problem that he was in. And the rabbi stops and says, 1 second. Do you look at your watch? It's 11 o'clock at night. If you want my help, call my office in the morning, and we'll set up a meeting, and we'll help you. Rabbis don't work at 11 o'clock at night. But if you're looking for a rabbi who does work at 11 o'clock at night, you got to call RabbiJJ Hecht. Because the only rabbi who's taking your call at 11 o'clock at night to help you is Rabbi Hecht. Don't call me. When you look at your phone book, also look at your watch. And at 11 o'clock, you don't call it a normal rabbi. Rabbi Hecht, you can call at 11 o'clock. Because to help another Jew, there's nothing that Rabbi Hecht wouldn't do. He would get out of bed and do whatever he had to do. It didn't matter. Do I have a few more minutes? A minute or two. Okay. There are two, I want to end with two short stories about which are very close to both myself and my wife. Rabbi Hecht one weekend went up to Camp Emunah, and the story goes that there was a little girl who was crying on Friday afternoon. He came over to her and said, why are you crying? She said, well, the situation was she was from a poor family. She only had one or maybe two Shabbos dresses, and they were both dirty. She didn't have any clean clothes for Shabbos. Rabbi Hecht went himself, and he took her clothing, and he went and did laundry, and he made sure she had a clean dress for Shabbos. And when he came up the following week to camp, he went and he brought her brand new, beautiful dresses that he bought for this little girl. So this story actually is what inspired my wife to start the Bridal Giving Boutique, which was named in memory of Rebbe Hecht, which brings brand new outfits to young brides in our community who are struggling. Another minute or we're done? I have more stories, but that's all for me. I'm being thrown off. Okay, thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
I will begin to share a few stories. Once again, if you didn't wash, it is a Sudas mitzvah. Please wash and enjoy the food. And And we are in one of the reasons we made tonight's Mesiba here in Adaret Torah. The Rebbe, after during Shiva, actually asked one of the secretaries to come to ask us, the family, to name one of the institutions. My father was involved close to 50 different projects, to name one of the institutions for my father. And truth be told, my father was blessed with 5 sons and 5 daughters, and the boys wanted the yeshiva. The girls wanted the camp. After all, my father did pass away in camp, and it was a girls' camp, and they thought it would be appropriate. So we couldn't make a decision. Meanwhile, we were getting a call from Eastern Parkway, from 770. Guys, what is your decision? So I suggested, what's the problem? Let's tell the Rebbe that simply that some of us think that it should be the yeshiva, and some of the things should be camp, and so they told the Rebbe said, "Was ist das stira? What's the contradiction? One is a full-time institution, and one is a summer institution, and therefore it's appropriate to name both institutions for Rabbi Hecht." So those of the Talmidim that are here or alumni that are here, the fact that you were sitting in a yeshiva that carries Rabbi Hecht's name is a great schus. Now for my formal part of this evening's program, to share a few stories with you. I go around, I meet people, and often people think that the NCFJE, National Committee for Furthering Jewish Education, was actually started by Rabbi Hecht. Actually, it was not. National Committee, which is the first program of, it was first called Committee for Furthering Jewish Education. The first program was the release time, what the Rebbe spoke about after my passing of my father, and it was taking children on Wednesdays. That actually started in 1941. It was the first outreach program of Chabad here in America. And there was a director that was appointed, and that director had the position until 1945. In 1945, one day, he was a little bit upset. He took his keys and he walked into the office of the Ramash, which that's what they called the Rebbe. And he came in and he took the keys and he threw it down on the Rebbe's desk. And he says, "I quit." The Rebbe very quietly, very softly took the keys, let the man leave, wished him well, and that was it. The Rebbe picked up the telephone, called RabbiJJ36 Hecht to come see him. The Rebbe said, "Here are the keys." My father would often tell that story. He was 22 years old. And my father tells a story always, he juxtaposed that story with a few years later. It was the 1960s, and the winter was a very fierce winter. And so much so that the casino, what they called the casino then in camp, like the big shul with the girls in Camp Amuna, the casino, the snow was so heavy that the whole building caved in. My father would tell the story. It was he got the call. He said, "Yeah, this is the state police. We just want to let you know what you're going to be doing about your building that fell onto the road." That. Anyways, my father. It was the burden was a little bit too heavy with all the different projects that he was then running, and he discussed it with my mother, and they wrote a long letter to the Rebbe that he really would like to resign from working. And it was, from what I understand, a full page, written the entire page. Well, with this letter, he put the keys into an envelope and sent it back. He gets out, the secretary calls him up and says, "Listen, let me tell you what the Rebbe answered to you. Maybe you want to come in and see what the Rebbe actually did." The Rebbe, with his pencil, because the Rebbe would write with a pencil, looked like he took and made a line through the entire paper from bottom up, that so strong that the Rebbe wrote on the paper that paper actually tore. He tore the paper. And paper was full, so all the way on the bottom he writes, "I have no time to read shtusim. Have no time to read foolishness," and sent back the keys. And my father says, "That's when I knew I was in for life, and we have to work. There are seats more to the front if you're going to join us. The relationship of Rabbi JJ and the Rebbe started when he was, he says, I was 16 years old, I saw the Rebbe the first time, I fell in love with the Rebbe. And he would tell people, I was the Rebbe's caddy's boy. I would drive the Rebbe after my father got his license, and his father had a car. My Zaidi was very rich, he had a car, and often he would drive the Rebbe to the library meaning Grand Army Plaza. One of the reasons why the Rebbe went to Grand Army Plaza was because those days, if you had to make photostats, most places did not have photostat machines, and if you wanted to make a copy, you had to go to the library. So the Rebbe would prepare things, and my father would drive him, and he would make his copies, and my father would drive him back. Often, my father said, I don't know what the word often means, but from time to time, the Rebbe would take out books, and take out books out of the library. He would take out 10 books, 12 books, 15 books. And interestingly enough, he'd say, by the next morning, he called my father ready that we can go back to the library to give the books back. So he says, I don't know, the Rebbe read through the books in overnight. When he was telling the story once, one of my father's grandchildren, my nephew, asked the Rebbe, so what were the books about? He says, we did not look in those days. It wasn't our business. We didn't look. But I knew my father was better than that. I said, to my father, knew what the Rebbe took out books on psychology and ideas. And again, he would take the books out the next day already. He would return the books. Often, as I said, he would make copies. So one day, the Rebbe had to make a copy on the Baal Shem Tov Siddur. There were some copies that he had to make. So the Rebbe sees my father. He says, Yankel, given Wasser? You went to the mikveh today? He says, yeah. He says, well, I have a special treat for you today. And he showed him, certain pages of the Baal Shem Tov Siddur. And he also showed him that by one of the places where it says Shema Yisrael, on top of Shema Yisrael, there were 2 black dots. And the Rebbe told my father that those 2 black dots are blood that came from the Baal Shem Tov's eyes that fell onto the page. And the great tshuka, the great desire that the Baal Shem Tov had to be one with God when he said Shema Yisrael, that brought out the blood from his eyes, and that was on the page. By the way, others who have went through the Siddur or at certain times or shown the Siddur also had, it was an amazing experience, the power and energy that just came from that Siddur, and my father would talk about that. Later on, my father also had the opportunity to drive the Rebbe to the oil, so we're now talking about in the early 1950s. And there were different people, before Rabbi Krinsky had his full-time job, Rabbi Krinsky was relatively younger, various different people had an opportunity to drive the Rebbe to the oil. So my father drives the Rebbe to the oil. They get back to 770. The Rebbe says to my father, Yankel, du machst schneller wie die andere. He says, Yankel, you drive quicker than the others. So my father looks at him like, how do you know that? He says, well, I still have what to say in my minor Lashon, because the Rebbe would say a lot of the stuff on the way there, on the way back. He would be saying things and mostly read the letters. Then he was at the oil. So he says, I still have what to say, and therefore I know you've. It was a nice way of probably saying, I know you were speeding, but it's okay. Rabbi Mengel told me, and I verify this by others, that when the Rebbe became Rebbe, there were certain people who were given permission that they can walk into the Rebbe's office whenever they want. You just have to knock on the door or come to the Rebbe, and the Rebbe would let them in. And my father was offered that opportunity. And my father told the Rebbe, I do not want to be different than other Chassidim. So much so that he did not want to be different. That many years later, he was going through a difficulty, and he pushed for the secretaries that he needs to go into Yechidus. And as soon as my father walked in to Yechidus, the Rebbe said to him, a Talmudic expression, Dochak v'nichnichs. You pushed your way and you got in. As if to say, my father took it that the Rebbe was sort of rebuking him, why did you have to push for an extra yechidus? My father had his standard times when he was able to go into the Rebbe, and the Rebbe sort of was not pleased with this extra time that he went in. Now, Chassidim talk about, particularly around the time of Yud Shvat, they talk about, when did the Rebbe become Rebbe? Did the Rebbe become Rebbe in Tafshin Yud in 1950, or the day after, or maybe the day or day after, on Yud Aleph Shvat, or Friedrich Rebbe went his way, and did the Rebbe become Rebbe, or those different stories that they went and they were asking the Rebbe to take Nesius, that, the Rebbe sort of shied away from it, and different conversations. A lot of talk is about that thing. But let me say to you that I think the Hechts, when I once asked my father, by the way, how was it then? He says, we knew immediately, he's the Rebbe, period. But my uncle Avram tells a story. He says, at the Levaya, he says, I wrote a kvittel and gave it to the Rebbe, and the Rebbe took it. He asked for a bracha or something. But perhaps this story will shine a different light on this. Chassidim, by Chabad, we know that the Rabbeim had a special minhag to put a silver tray under the kaira, under the matzah, on the night of Pesach. So now follow the story. It is Tafshin Yud, Erev Pesach, about 11 o'clock in the morning. My father walks out of the Ramash, that was still the Rebbe's office, and he bumps into his brother, and his brother says, Yankel, what's the matter? He says, I don't know what to do. The Rebbe asked me if I can please buy him a becher for Yontif, but he wants a little bit of a larger size becher. And then he told Uncle Shulam that I actually bought him his tray for under his matzahs, which means that the Rebbe asked my father to buy him a tray for under his matzahs. Anyway, it's not a round tray, it's a hectagon tray. The library actually has a tape. Rabbi Levin made a beautiful tape about the tray and one or two other things, a becher and things that the Rebbe had. And he tells his younger brother, listen, I have a family, it's Erev Pesach, I'm not able to go buy the Rebbe the becher. I actually bought him his tray, but now the Rebbe is asking me to get him a becher. So Uncle Shulam says, okay, I'll go. Uncle Shulam got in the Tompkins Avenue bus, which Kingston Avenue bus, went to the east side, and Uncle Shulam told me himself the story. He says, I went from one store to another store. No stores had a larger becher. He says, it's late in the afternoon. He's at the end of the block. There's a store, because it seems that on that street there was many Moiches Svarim, like Hebrew bookstores or Hebrew artifact stores. And he says, I'm looking in the window, and there's a becher there that looks a larger size. He said, how can I get this becher? I'm standing there watching, and I notice the curtain is moving. There's someone in the store. So I go over to the door, I start knocking on the door, and first the guy ignores me. I'm still knocking. The guy says, Gayavek, leave me alone. Don't bother me. It's Erev Yontif. It's late. No, he says, no. This is a mitzvah for a special Jew. I need to. Anyway, he convinced him to let him in. He said that he wants the becher. He says you'll be blessed if you. And he got the becher. Came back to 770. He says it was about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. He knocked on the Rebbe's door. The Rebbe came. He said, my brother told me you were looking for a larger becher. Here is a becher. The Rebbe took the becher. He says, wait a minute. Closed the door. Came back a few minutes later. He says, yeah, so good. He says, it's Erev Yontif. We can't cheshbon out. I'm giving you $1. And after Yontif, I'll see how much money I owe you, but I want to buy the becher from you. And that was the story. But to us, and the family, the fact that the Rebbe asked my father to buy him the tray shows an indication that it was way earlier than that the Rebbe knew that he was going to be our Nasi. Rabbi Hecht was international, as my son mentioned before. It was an ambassador for Chabad, went to many, many different places to speak. But in 1976, he actually went to Oxford University and spoke for Jewish students there. I don't remember, what it was. I think they said it was like some type of convention with students that had over 1,000 students there, and he spoke. And it was after that speech that they coined him. They called him the Jewish Billy Graham, because his fire was so strong that. But talking about England. Peter Combs writes in his book. Peter Combs is a Makurev to Lubavitch and a great worker for Chabad, and did some great things. In 1975, he writes in his book, 1975, he decided he's going to make an international women's convention, like a Sheikh Chabad for women in Europe. And he came to the Rebbe, and he's discussing this idea. And he's like sort of talking about different people who he should take as the keynote speaker. So the Rebbe listens. He mentions this name, that name. The Rebbe says, maybe you should think about RabbiJJ Hecht. He says, no, I discussed it with Feivish Vogel. Rabbi Hecht is too flamboyant. He's not the right person for the English temperament. So the Rebbe tells him, I know the English temperament, and I also know Rabbi Hecht. I think it's a good fit. In fact, when you can go out, get some tapes, and you can listen to Rabbi Hecht's speeches, and you can see that he's the right guy. Now, sure enough, okay, after that, that endorsement, of course, they asked my father to go. My father went, and my father came back. I remember then it was unbelievable. He spoke, those of us who sometimes stand in the front of the podium, we know that sometimes it goes and sometimes it doesn't. But he knew that he really hit a home run. Well, a few days later, Uncle Shulam goes into the Rebbe. He had permission to go whenever he wanted, so he goes into the Rebbe. The Rebbe says to Uncle Shulam, "No, the Bruder hat gemacht gut in London, huh?" He says, your brother did a good job in London. Did you hear? So he says, Ich habe gesagt, geht mit dem Koich HaMeshalech. He said, I told my brother not to worry. You're going with the energy and the strength of the Rebbe. Of course you're going to do a good job. So the Rebbe says, no, nein, allein darf man euch sein etwas. You have to have quality. Yeah, in other words, the Rebbe didn't deny that he gave energy to Rabbi Hecht, but you have to have a starting point. That you have to have talent, and then the blessings will work. Year ago, just a little bit more than a year ago, I was in London because of my cult work that I do, and I was there for Shabbos, and I spoke in 4 different shtieblach close to the Satmar community So Shabbos morning, I spoke in a shul, and after I finished speaking, a guy walks over to me, says, "What's your last name?" I said, my last name is Hecht. He says, what are you to Jacob Hecht? I said, Rabbi JJ, that was my father. He starts getting emotional. He walks away from me, comes back a few minutes later and says, I just want to tell you something. 62 years ago, your father saved my mother from a Christian home. And I said to him, what do you mean Christian home? So no. My mother was adopted by Christian parents, and the Lubavitcher Rebbe got your father involved, and I believe the Lubavitcher Rebbe paid for. This was a landmark case that was brought all the way to the Supreme Courts because they flipped an adoption. The girl was already adopted by Christians. He says, my mother told me she used to go to church every Sunday. And your father got involved, and they were able to unadopt her and place her in a Jewish home. My father placed her in Beis Rivka, brought it back to Crown Heights, put her into Beis Rivka, and then for high school, Beis Rivka at that time still did not have a high school or proper high school, and So she went to another Hasidic high school, and said my father was having a difficulty looking for shidduchim, and they saw a nice girl, and my mother married very young, and today she married a Satma, and she became a full-fledged Satma Chassid, etc. Okay, it was beautiful to hear the story. In fact, I knew the story because there was a poster child, there were articles, and later he sent me all the articles from different newspapers. Again, it was a landmark case, the fact that Rabbi Hecht was able to reverse the adoption. And now comes for the kicker. He then said to me, he said, I just want to let you know, my mother today has more than 100 children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. And I'm not talking about people who married in. I'm talking about my mother's children and their children. Over 100 people. So when you save one person, think of how many, and we're only talking 63 years later, of what we accomplished. There is a video out there that my father spoke in 770 about a letter. This was in Mem Zion in 1987. He spoke about that in Tovshin, a few months before the Frierdiker Rebbe passed away. Frierdiker Rebbe wrote a letter to my father about the work that he does, and he says, your neshama came down to this world to save thousands of children. Thousands of children. And this is the work is done. Yes, it's release time, but it's Hadarat Torah, it's Machan Liyados, it's Camp Emunah, it's all the work that NCFGE does. One of the disappointments that my father had, he always wanted to go to Russia. In the 1980s in particular, there was a nice Jewish organization in his neighborhood, and they would send different people to Russia all the time. They would usually take shluchim from far out places, so when they got to Russia, they wouldn't have to say, where do you live? In Crown Heights. We know why. My father wanted to go, and the Rebbe never let him. And we know why, because he was too associated with the Rebbe. And therefore, wouldn't be able to accomplish anything if they went there, they would be watching him. But the interesting thing is that in the 1980s, after Governor Cuomo, Mario Cuomo, got elected as governor, he decided that he's going to visit Moscow. And sure enough, my father got a call from 770, and he was told because he was very close to Governor Cuomo, that he should meet with the governor, and he sent then Sidurim and Machzorim. It was in the month of August that he went, and he sent Sidurim and Machzorim to Russia. Now, of course, the governor said to my father, how will I know what to do with it? He says, don't worry about it. Our boys in Russia will contact you, and they'll know about everything, and they'll take the books. One of the projects that Rabbi Hecht started actually from the release time and before the children of the release time was Camp Emunah, which today is a very, very different situation. And often Rabbi Hecht, in the month of June, he would write to the Rebbe, I don't have enough children, there's have empty beds still, I don't have enough staff, etc., etc. And the Rebbe would answer him, give him brachas, etc. But one year, my father wrote to the Rebbe, he says, we're having a difficulty particularly getting staff members. And it's because the girls are going to shluchim who are running day camps other places, and they feel that, that's a greater shlichus. To which the Rebbe then said that you should know that the girls who go to work in Camp Emunah it's shlichus mehashem mamish. It is a clear shlichus directly from Hashem working in Camp Emunah. This is Rabbi Klein after Gimel Tammuz was standing in 770 talking to him once. He says, Shia, I'm often asked the question. People ask me which chassid got a lot of answers from the Rebbe? He says, there was only one name that comes to mind. Yankel Hecht. Yankel Hecht got many answers from the Rebbe. Well, first of all, it's possible that he wrote more than others. On an average week, he would write a few times a week. Sometimes more than once a day even. In fact, at a certain point, instead of running back and forth, he decided from our telephone system, he put a telephone into America's. So if he had a direct line to 770. But he would often get letters. Now, some of you sitting in this room would remember Larry Michelle. Larry Michelle lived in this neighborhood, and before his second son's bar mitzvah, he came to my father to help him write the settled. It was ready. It was a Yechidus Klolis, and he came to my father to help him write the letter for the bar mitzvah for his son. So he writes the letter, and my father then pulls out a pink envelope and puts the letter into a pink envelope. He says, Rabbi Hecht, what's this? He says, well, often, I do get answers, but often I put it into pink envelopes. The Rebbe knows it's me just by looking at the envelope before thing. And sure enough, the Rebbe speaks to the bar mitzvah boys, and then he comes by with the bar mitzvah boy, and he gives the letter to the Rebbe. And the Rebbe looks at this pink envelope, and the Rebbe picks his head up to see, who is this? Who's this? Of course, I'm sure the Rebbe recognized my father's writing as well. But that's an interesting part of the relationship that they had. More than once, the Rebbe told my father, because my father told the Rebbe that I look to you as a father. I don't have a father, and there was particularly once that he once wrote to the Rebbe, and then he apologized. He says, I wrote to you because this is the way I would speak to my father. And the Rebbe told him, I love you more than your father. So the Rebbe was very, very concerned. One of the things my father really enjoyed doing was public speaking. He went to London. He was there for 7 days. He came home. I was there for 7 days, 8 speeches. He went to South Africa. He was there for 19 days. He came back after 19 days. He says, I was there for 19 days, 21 speeches. Okay. So sure enough, Rabbi Yitzchak Grona calls him up once and invites him to come and speak. Rabbi Yitzchak Grona used to make once a year, bring a speaker and take him around Australia, different cities, and my father really wanted to go. And they writes it up, the Rebbe tells him no. So my father writes back to the Rebbe, is the Rebbe upset with me? Because this week I wrote in a number of times, I didn't get answers, and the answers that I did get were somewhat negative, and the Rebbe told me no, The Rebbe says, long answer, you choshed me that I'm upset with you? When I care about you, you're going to travel, where you're going to eat, where you're going to sleep. There's a change of climate. There's a change of hours. I'm concerned about your health, and you're thinking negative? No. So it was a tremendous advantage. Now, the next 3 stories are classic stories. You probably heard them. I think it pays on a day of Yartzeit to repeat them. I see we're only on a live stream for another 10 minutes. Hopefully we'll finish these 3 stories. The first thing is as follows. Rosh Hashanah Tofshin Yud Zayin. Rosh Hashanah Tofshin Yud Zayin. The Rebbe went to Tashlach, and it poured. It poured. And you remember that? Wow, that's great. Okay. And the Rebbe gets to Brooklyn Botanical Gardens by President Street, and it's locked. Gate is locked. And the Rebbe gave his siddur to someone at the hold, climbs over the fence, and did Tashlach and came back.
He showed everybody the way to go.
That's right. Showed Lachatchila Rebbe. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So the Rebbe took leadership. So one day after that, Chassidim are sitting around, and Rabbi JJ says, what was the Rebbe thinking when he climbed over that fence? So they look at him. What are you normal? What do you mean? What can I ask? What was the Rebbe thinking? He says, I'll tell you what the Rebbe was thinking. The Rebbe was thinking about me. They look at him. What? Well, let me tell you the story. Erev Rosh Hashanah, you go to give your kvittel to the Rebbe. Erev Rosh Hashanah, my father comes to the Rebbe, and he says to the Rebbe, Alta Shaila, he says, I usually come with you for Tashlich, and in my shul, they say Tillim. And I feel if I'm there, they're going to tackle more people who show up, more people will say Tillim. But if I'm not there, people are not they're not going to say Tillim. So what should I do? The Rebbe says, Saglai Chazach, it's proper to stay in your shul and say Tillim with your people. And at twilight, when the Shkia comes, run downstairs, open up a sink, let the water run, say Tashlich, and then in the middle of the week you'll go again. Of course, by Koshel Bracha, the Rebbe gave Koshel Bracha for Rosh Hashanah. The Rebbe told my father, I was thinking about you when I was climbing over the fence. I was thinking of sending 2 shluchim to come and bring you so you should see what the experience is like climbing over the fence. So I know what the Rebbe was thinking when he was climbing over the fence. The next story is, again, a classic story. It's told like every good Baal Shem Tov story, some of the facts and figures are changed. It was even written up a little bit wrong, but I'll tell you the story the best way that I remember it. And one of the reason why I remember it is because my chaver was there at the entire time. Tafshin Nun Shmini Atzeres. Let's go back. This is 1989 Sukkot time. My mother and father are eating in the sukkah. They finish eating, and my father needs to bench, and my mother took the dishes, and she walked in, went into the house. My father, Baruch Hashem, he didn't only fall asleep Friday night by the table sometimes, in the middle of the week also, and he falls asleep in the sukkah. And he has a dream. He's there standing in Gan Eden HaTachten. He's standing in the antechambers of the Rebbe's room. And he says, I wanted to give the Rebbe a kiss. I just wanted to give the Rebbe a kiss. But how can I kiss the Rebbe if all these people are around? There are other people. And I woke up. Okay. It's now, as I mentioned, Shmini Atzeres. They're going to Hakafes. They danced Hakafes in East Flatbush, where my father's shul was. My father had to drink, as always. He was a Baruch Hashem. He knew how to say L'chaim. He had a few L'chaims. He's walking one hand over Kalman Shor, who was my chavrusa in yeshiva, another hand over some Russian guy who came for the first time to Lubavitch, and they're marching and dancing from East Flatbush to 770. And it's late already. 9 o'clock started the Hakafis, at the races. But my father starts telling them his cellar. He says, Kalman, he says, I want to tell you something. I had a dream 2 nights ago in the sukkah. I was sitting, and he tells them the dream. Okay. They get to 770. The Rebbe goes, the first Hakafa, second Hakafa was always for Rabbanim. My father always had the second Hakafa. And the Rebbe is clapping away and as they're singing. And in the middle of clapping, he blows a kiss to the people who are dancing in the middle. Now, it could be anyone. No one knew who he blew the kiss to. That's what my father says. I knew exactly who he blew the kiss to. But it was then as they because they would bring back the Sefer Torahs back to the Aron. And as they bring it back, my father got up on the table. And the Rebbe, in the latter years, when they were waiting for that, he would turn around and face the people and sing. It wasn't the regular hakafa, but they would sing even though the hakafa was over. And sure enough, the Rebbe is, calmly clapping, and he sees my father on the table. They're about 20 feet from each other, and the Rebbe goes again and blows him a second kiss. So at that point, everybody knew exactly who he's talking about. But here's the kicker. After that night, everybody came over. Rabbi Hecht, Shmuel came over to him, and he says, Shmuel, I just want to tell you something. I always knew that the Rebbe knows what I'm thinking, but I never knew that the Rebbe even knows what I'm dreaming. And finally, the great, great story that all Chassidim have to know, something that really has to give us all inspiration, and that was the famous story that there are videos of, with the wording, what took place on Lag BaOmer. So this is Tafshin Nun. Again, now it's 1990, Lag BaOmer. The parade, there's a great parade going on. But my father, when he would have the task of translating the Rebbe's sichos when he spoke to children, my father didn't take that task lightly. Those of us who were around in the office for an hour or two before, you couldn't talk to him. He wouldn't take telephone calls. He would pace back and forth downstairs. He would write a letter to the Rebbe. Please, I have the task of translating you, but please do me a favor. I should be able to know what the Rebbe, understand what the Rebbe is saying, so I should be able to give over the Rebbe's desire in the best of ways. It's Lag BaOmer. It's late in the afternoon, and my father's, we'll say his spirits were low. We'll say it that way. And he writes to the Rebbe a letter. He says, Baruch Hashem, we've lined up the busing and this and all things, and people are coming. They're coming from New Haven, and they're coming from Bridgeport, and coming from these places. So gave a list of all the different places they're coming from, etc., etc. Then he writes to the Rebbe that my mood is very, very, I don't want to use the D word, my father, but he wrote that my spirits are down. Okay? And he sends a letter into the Rebbe before Shabbos. The parade was really a beautiful parade. It was actually the last parade that both my father and the Rebbe stood together. And after the parade, what always happened was, right before, when the Rebbe finished and spoke to kids and everybody went, and the Rebbe would be ready to go back to his room, my father would always go over to the Rebbe and said, Nu, the Rebbe gewinnt zufrieden? He would ask the Rebbe, are you happy? So he does this again. He comes to the Rebbe's friend, and the Rebbe says yes. And then the Rebbe said, "Und was ist mit eure Stimmung? And what's with your mood?" In other words, you wrote me on Friday that you were down, that your mood is down. What's with your mood? So my father said, "No, ich gewusst that the Rebbe wird mir schleppen." He said, "I know the Rebbe is going to pull me out of my melancholy. He's going to play." So the Rebbe said, "Nein, aufheben." And that's where you can see the videos. I mean, you can't hear them speaking to each other, but you can see the Rebbe picks his hands up all the way up. My dear friends, it was the job of the Rebbe and Chassidim like Rabbi Hecht. It wasn't pulling somebody out of their state, their being, their place, but it was aufheben. It was uplifting, to lift up the people. And that we have to know is, if we, and our relationship is with the Rebbe, is one of such. That the Rebbe, when we give ourselves over to the Rebbe lifts us up. No matter where we're at, no matter how high or not high we are, the Rebbe lifts us up. And at the same time, to understand that this is also the job. We Chassidim are, perhaps we can say, Chassidim are Shtik Rebbe. We're part of our Rebbe, and part of it, and that's what we have to do. When we come in contact with people, what we have to do is make sure to uplift them and to give to them what we are able to. My dear friends, first of all, I want to personally thank those who have made a special effort to come here tonight. May Hashem Yisbarach bless you. May the energy and the spirit and accomplishments of Rabbi Hecht be a bracha for you and your family as well. One of the things that my father was very, very concerned about always was those who need shidduchim, or those who need to be blessed with children, or nachas from children. It was something that was very, very much on his radar screen. And likewise, I say to you, for those of you, I know if he was standing here, this is the bracha that he would give you. Those who need to find shidduchim should find shidduchim, and those who need shidduchim for our children or our grandchildren or nephews and nieces, families, etc. And those of us who are involved, we need to have children. We should only have chassidish nachas from our kids, and we should go mechayel al chayel. And we know that the work does not complete. In fact, the Rebbe, I believe, told my father at one point that your job will continue even after Mashiach comes. Because Mashiach will come, there'll still be people who will have to teach them Torah. They'll need to know how to make brachas, how to serve Hashem. So we, in this business, we will hold on to our jobs. So for us, Mashiach has to come even quicker because the pay will probably be better, but the work will be the same. And again, the thanks and the brachas should go to all of us. It's a chassidische verbringen. If there's someone who wants to take the microphone and share a story, I come, Rabbi Yankel, come up here. Yankel Goldstein was my father would call him. I'll tell you one thing. Bob Liff was a writer for the Daily News. He says to me, if you want to know the image, what is in my head is the Lag BaOmer parade. When General Yankel Goldstein gives a salute to the Rebbe when he drives on a tank that drove by on Eastern Parkway. Yeah. Yeah.
Just to share a quick note, those people here, I don't know if everybody knows, I spent 38 years in the United States Army as an Army chaplain. Had roles in combat, Afghanistan. In Afghanistan and Iraq, Grenada, etc., etc. But what's important to this whole story is that in order to enter the Army, you fill out a ton of paperwork. So for some people, they would quit right there. It's just too much paperwork. But one of the most important documents that I had was a letter signed by Rabbi Hecht, attesting to the fact of my character and that I would be an outstanding chaplain and that the Army should accept me. And that went into my packet. Never forgot it. And I made it. Just a quick note on the Lag BaOmer parade. The Rebbe had spoken many times about tanks. And I already was in the Army, but I knew that the Rebbe never saw a tank where he was in France. So I made a decision that I'm going to bring a U.S. Army tank to the parade. Made phone calls, got permission. We put rubber treads into the treads with rubber pads so we wouldn't rip up the streets. And we rolled the tank from the armory in Staten Island to Crown Heights, 21 miles over the bridge. We came down the service road. There were soldiers in uniform. They marched. Color guard marched. I rode in the turret. When we came in front of 770, the Rebbe was there. I turned to the gunner. So that's what his job is. And I told him, take the main gun and traverse it towards the rabbi. So picture this. Here's Eastern Parkway. Tank stops. Now they're traversing the main gun, which a tank can do, and aiming at the Rebbe. The Rebbe stood for a second. He flinched. I felt terrible. I said to myself, what did I do here? I made the Rebbe flinch. When the tank came to Empire Boulevard, I ran back to 770, and I saw Label Groner, and I told him how terrible I feel that made the Rebbe flinch, because when you have the main barrel of a gun facing your face, it's not exactly an enjoyable moment, I think. Usually only bad people get to face the main gun. P.S. What happened was, Label turned to me and he says, what are you talking about? The Rebbe enjoyed every minute of that tank, including when he turned the gun towards Rebbe's face. In our business, that's called the salute. Tank can't talk, but that's what we did. So I'm only telling the story because we talked about the Lag BaOmer parade. It was a great time. So with the letter from Rabbi Hecht, I spent my 38 years and 4 months in uniform serving my country, and hopefully I did the right thing.